As a suspense novelist who writes online, I moved into an old house surrounded by forests in the suburbs with my wife Anna and our daughter, Maisie, in search of inspiration. This is a century-old building with traces of history. Although it's a bit dilapidated, it looks especially serene against the snow. The day after we moved, as I was cleaning the basement, I found a thick wooden box containing several yellowed old photos, several diaries, and a faded doll. The doll, though worn, seemed to reflect a strange luster in the dim light. I took it upstairs to study along with the photos and diaries, hoping to find inspiration for my writing. While writing in my study, I would take out the diaries I found in the wooden box. There were many of them, written by a lady named Margaret. She and her husband had a daughter, and the diaries mostly recorded her daily life and emotions, just like ordinary diaries. Among them was a tattered, yellowed green-covered diary filled almost entirely with scribbles, not ordinary drawings, but circles and large crosses drawn forcefully with a pen, even tearing the paper. The diary was also filled with unsettling words such as die, go die, and hate you. One entry that left a deep impression on me read, "Abby is becoming increasingly unbearable. I feel she is possessed by a demon. She even tried to seduce the new postman. Maybe I should ask the church to send someone to exorcise her." Another recorded a shocking scene. "Today Abby cried and made a scene with me, almost driving me out of my mind. I couldn't bear it anymore, tied her to a chair, and slapped her crazily while shouting, 'Demon, get out of my daughter's body.'" Then, I read the most horrifying entry. "Today is the 5th day of keeping Abby locked in the basement. She is getting weaker and can hardly speak. Dear Abby, you are about to defeat the demon, I believe you can do it." To expel it, I drew symbols on the ground and tied Abby in the center. The demon is extremely cunning, always begging me in Abby's voice to let her go, but I won't be fooled. Each page was suffocating, and the later diaries contained many unbearable records, making it almost impossible for me to continue reading. Without a doubt, Lady Margaret must have gone mad. I carefully examined some of the photos, which were images of a little girl, with "My dear daughter Abby" written on the back. One photo was particularly striking, a little girl with a sad face standing in front, and behind her was a woman with a blank expression. I guessed this was Margaret and Abby. One day when I was alone at home, I suddenly heard a loud noise coming from the kitchen. I rushed over and saw that the kitchen's back door was actually wide open, swaying back and forth with the cold wind. I thought I had forgotten to close it when I went out just now, so I went over to lock it. But when I looked outside, I found a row of small footprints in the snow outside the house, as if they were the size of a doll's. Those footprints extended to not far away, and in the middle of the snow, I actually saw the doll, lying there quietly. I was a bit scared, but I still mustered up the courage to go over, pick up the doll, and bring it back inside. I told myself it might just be an illusion. In the following days, strange things happened at home one after another, such as the newly replaced bedside light bulb always flashing a few times at 11:32 p.m., and the sound of chairs being dragged downstairs in the middle of the night. One day, I wanted to go to the basement again to see if there was anything to study, and found that the wooden box was inexplicably opened, and the items inside were scattered all over the floor. No one in the family except me would go to the basement. I kept telling myself that it must have been messed up when moving things. Anna began to feel uneasy and suggested finding a psychic to check. After all, she has always felt that this house has a sense of oppression. Finally, on a snowy night, we invited a psychic named Masha. Masha stood quietly, holding a string of wooden beads, wearing a black dress. She walked slowly in the living room, murmuring quietly. That night, we held a séance around the dining table, with me, Anna, and Masha. There were several candles on the table, and next to them was the doll. We held hands around the table, and I was a little excited in my heart. This kind of scene that only appears in movies actually happened in my home, but the reality is very different from what is seen in the movies. There is no eerie atmosphere of flickering candlelight, only cold air and Masha's heavy breathing. Masha closed her eyes and chanted some incomprehensible phrases in a low voice. After a while, her body suddenly stiffened, then she suddenly opened her eyes, and her pupils showed a strange light. Her voice became sharp and shrill, completely different from the previous piece. "Mom, I'm sorry, it's all my fault," she shouted. Anna tightly held my hand, and I tried to wake up Masha while enduring fear. She continued to say words that did not belong to her, with sadness and anger in her tone. What did I do wrong? Suddenly, the candle flame suddenly extinguished, and the whole room fell into darkness in an instant. The table began to shake violently, as if there was an invisible force venting anger. I hurriedly turned on the light and saw Masha sitting on the chair, pale. She spoke weakly, her voice trembling. "Just now when I was possessed, I saw many things. I saw a woman holding a knife, approaching step by step. And I was tied to a chair, unable to move. There was a continuous cry in my ear, 'Mom, I will be obedient, don't come, please.' Anna and I were silent after listening. Masha said, 'That doll once belonged to a little girl named Abby, and Abby's soul may be trapped in the doll. She longs for her mother's love but also cannot be released because she can't get it. She hates you, or more accurately, she no longer trusts anyone. But her biggest resentment comes from her deep love and hatred for her mother.'" Masha finished, barely stood up, and warned us, "This soul will not leave easily unless she feels relieved." That night, the snow outside became more and more fierce, almost covering all the roads. Anna insisted on taking Maisie to live in a hotel, and I stayed at home to pack up. When I was halfway through packing, I couldn't help but think of the content of Margaret's diary, her record of locking Abby in the basement. An uncontrollable curiosity drove me to check below. The basement was only filled with clutter and spider webs. I searched carefully but found nothing. Just as I was about to give up, I suddenly found that the space of the basement was obviously much smaller than the first floor, and a sense of unease welled up in my heart. I began to knock on the walls with my fists. Sure enough, the sound of one wall was hollow and muffled, and the wall was obviously newer than the others. I hurriedly took a large hammer and kept hitting, and when the wall fell, a narrow and hidden space was revealed. It was dim inside. I raised my flashlight to illuminate, and saw a mottled pentagram on the ground, with a dilapidated wooden chair in the center, and there seemed to be some black stains on the ground, very similar to dried bloodstains. Looking at the incredible scene, I took a deep breath, trying to let myself recover from this trance, but the shock in my heart has not subsided for a long time. The next morning, I took my family back to my hometown, and the doll was still left in that house. Later, I have been searching for clues about the incident on the internet and even went to the local library to check old newspapers. Finally, in an inconspicuous corner of a newspaper, I found a short report. The title read, "A mentally ill mother killed her own daughter." The moment I saw the picture, I froze. Wasn't the woman in the photo Margaret? According to the report, Margaret's husband was a philanderer, and they often quarreled. After the divorce, Margaret's mental state gradually collapsed. She went to the church many times to ask the pastor to help exorcise, and even said everywhere that her 7-year-old daughter was possessed by a demon, seducing men everywhere. The church called the police many times but could not stop this lady. Finally, on a snowy night, she locked her young daughter Abby in the basement and killed her. That night, Margaret seemed to have lost her mind, rushed out of the house alone, and finally collapsed in the snow about 2 kilometers away from home. When found, she had already frozen to death. The police estimated that Abby's death occurred between 10 p.m. and 12 a.m. and Margaret's death occurred a few hours later. This report made me feel an unprecedented chill, not only because of the cruelty of the story but also because all of this actually happened in my house. I feel very distressed for Abby, who still longs for love under her mother's cruel treatment. Until now, she is still waiting for her mother to come home. Although my family has moved, that house still stands alone, and it is impossible to sell.